taxi duel.
All right. I pull up next to your taxi at the green light, look out and say, I bet I can get there first.
I don't even look at you and I floor it.
I expected that, turning sideways and knowing a shortcut down a back alley.
As I floor it forward, I see a truck with its little thing down, and I use it as a ramp to jump over cars.
As I loop around back my shortcut, I go down the part of the road that I expect you to, and I shoot up things into the air that'll catch on your windshield once you go flying over.
I pull down my gas mask from the taxi and turn it into airplane mode as I swerve and dodge all of the things that you sent up at me and drop a bomb down onto you.
The bomb gets caught by my bomb catcher and explodes, fueling my car to go into turbo mode from all the expended energy.
I pull the lever that gets rid of all of the excess metal on my taxi, and it nosedives into the ground at the exact same speed as you.
The impact into the ground creates a giant seismic wave that propels my car up into the sky. I activate my airplane mode.
And so I look to the passenger in my taxi, who is a meteorologist, and ask him to summon the most deadly storm while you're up there.
I turn to my passenger and say, is anyone on board a doctor?
There are no doctors in your car.
I say, good, because there'll be no one to help my opponent. And with that, I take out a gun and start shooting down at your taxi.
Ooh, there are bullet holes in my taxi, but they only increase the aerodynamicity as I get closer and closer to our shared destination.
I can see it, and I use a magnifying glass in reverse to make it look farther away from your car.
And as I see it look farther away in reverse from where I thought it was, I turn.
You turn?
I turn.
Punk, I'm about to get there. I'm inches from the finish line. You've turned in the wrong direction. It is absolutely hopeless for you. I turn around to give you the middle finger out the window.
And as my car turns, I jump out of the window with my taxi roller skates moving faster than any car could because of my light weight now.
I see that, surprised, but know that your shields are down. I take out my gun for a second time. One bullet right in your stomach.
Into my stomach, I come falling down, but it sends me into a somersault. While I may not be conscious at this point, I am moving faster than I was before.
No, I realize my mistake too late. The blast of the barrel has pushed my shoulder in the wrong direction, propelling my car the wrong way.
And with no passengers to be accounted for and a bullet hole in my stomach, I arrive at the destination first.
I wonder how long that was. We should have put a timer on. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. I'm one of your hosts, Hal Munger, and joining me now on the line is your other host, Julian Bernardo.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. I'm glad to be seeing you all today and that you're hearing us. We are going to be kind of menaces on this episode, if I'm correct. We're going to be discussing some of the most villainous and conflicting things that we possibly could.
Yeah, and are we going to be discussing those villainous and conflicting things with anybody else?
No, we are not. You may have noticed that it is just me and Hal. There's no secret guest.
No one to keep us in check. No one to keep you safe.
We had to keep other people off the podcast for this episode because we're truly going to get a little bit brave and controversial.
Well, I don't know about brave.
Yeah.
We'll see. All right. But yeah, the point of this episode is enemies, villains, and the ordeal, or just enemies and the ordeal.
Ooh. So if you'll remember last time we talked about tests and allies. We left off the like enemies part of that stage, so we'll talk a little bit about that today. But we're basically going to be talking about the villain that you might find in the hero's journey and the climactic clash that the hero and the villain have towards the end of the hero's journey.
Yeah, and the Ordeal, which is another sort of name for that class or clash, really was a huge breakthrough that we had last year. I felt like it was kind of the most promising idea of the year, and it was a year full of crazy ideas. So, I mean, really what you're going to get out of this episode, rather than like a ton of exercises necessarily, is this idea that you can play with. And it is a powerful, crazy thing that can provide really something that I'd never seen before in improv, but it also is a little risky. So we'll caveat what we're saying that you should be really careful while you're doing this. But this is a kind of crazy episode, and it's got some interesting things, but not entirely try this at home. Maybe try this at home in a safe way, right?
Yeah. Listen to the caveats, and 100% never pull this out with improvisers who don't know that you're gonna pull it out. This is something to talk about with your ensemble and figure out like a shared place.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get too much into the Ordeal stuff, I think it would be good to just in general talk about how we play enemies in improv, how we play like a villain, because a lot of improv formats don't necessarily have enemies or villains. So this might be one of the first ones you're doing where we have such a specific villain.
Yeah. And just in general, like, part of this is the time padding. You're trying to tell a story that is like an hour long, and if you're just following the any story that you're telling, you probably want to be bouncing back and forth between at least one or two different people, because it gives punctuations to the scene that you're seeing. And the same story with little breaks in between just feels way more compelling than without that.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways.
Plots and B plots. And
B plots. And we didn't mention B plots in the allies thing, but oftentimes there's like a friend who's chasing after them, like trying to catch up with them or something like that. So you might have an ally filling a similar role to the villain, but for now we're going to be talking villain B plots.
Yeah. So as we alluded to, you can have enemies can apply to anybody who's really the adversary to the hero, but you can have enemies who do clash with the hero. And while we talked about tests before with Danya, and some of the very same things that we talked about with tests can be applied, like with an enemy being the one who's essentially causing this test. But in addition to this, separate from like the tests that the hero faces on the journey, we can also have cutaway scenes where we are hearing either from this villain or from maybe some of the lackeys of the villain.
Yeah. And when is kind of the right time to cut away to your first villain scene, or does it depend on the type of villain that you're having in the show?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two types, I think, that matter for this distinction, right? Which is you could have a villain who is either like a dark ally or somebody who like existed in the ordinary world. That happens sometimes, and in that case, you'll probably like meet the villain pretty early on and like hear about them. You could hear about them being villainous later. If the villain is like some sort of evil person who maybe just exists in the special world, I would estimate that like a couple scenes into test allies and enemies is when I'd want to see the villain.
So maybe we should go through in kind of chronological order, and that can kind of hit how a couple different types of villains. So like, is there any villain who would ever appear in the very first scene?
This is, I think, so we actually tried this. I don't know if you remember. We tried this once.
I love this. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Go.
This is Star Wars. Star Wars starts with Darth Vader appearing and, Leia sending away the plans before we even see Luke. And so you can start your story with the villain. It seems like how you have some enthusiasm. So maybe you have some more specific things about trying this in improv.
I love doing this in improv. The one time we tried it, or like the one Hero's Journey show that had it, we did a terrible job with it. So I can't promise you. But we did something similar in some of the film noirs where the first scene would be like you would meet some character and then the next scene they would be dead, and we never. So it's kind of this throwaway thing. But basically, if you can see the villain kill someone else or do something else devious, or Lego Movie starts this way. We've mentioned that before. Harry Potter 4, like it's just an epic move that kind of puts you into like knowing what kind of world is coming next. It's a little risky because you don't want to try to establish too much plot in that moment. You have to know that you're going to cut backwards, and there's a chance that someone kind of flubs it and thinks the villain is the protagonist. But that is a totally fun and awesome thing that I would call that scene 0.
Yeah, scene 0.
I was hinting at something else when I was talking scene 1, which is rivals.
Okay.
Like the kind of villainous person who's not a villain, and well, maybe they try to kill you at some point, but more in like the Draco Malfoy sense of a villain. Or what's a Julian counterpart to Draco? Like Gary. Yeah. Someone who is gonna provide consistent negative endowments to the other person.
Yeah, and so if you do have a rival villain in your show, do you think that we should like cut to them at like various times and test allies and enemies? Should they appear like Gary style as like intermediate like challenges for the hero, or how do you think someone would pull that off?
I mean, at the beginning of the show, a rival's job is to be an endower. They want to endow a lot of worldview stuff in a double negative way, where you make the person look good by endowing negative things about them. But I think, it's the troll Gary thing, where a lot of times the rival is already ahead, or it depends if the rival is better, like then they're already ahead, or otherwise they might be competing during the challenge and like cheating or like, whatever. But it's more for like competition style things, or the 39 Clues is another. That's a book that has a lot of rival teams searching for a thing, and a lot of the villains are encountering various rivals.
But this is pretty unpaved territory. Like we didn't do any of those for our heroes' journeys, right?
Yeah, we didn't have any rival villain. We've had lots of them across our shows, but I don't think any of our heroes' journey shows had a rival villain who went on the journey as well. That's not the classic part of the classic.
So this could be some kind of exploratory work if you do want to practice rivals within this format. Just try to think about how it might work, and let us know if you do.
Cool. And then I think the next stage of the hero's journey where they might come in is the call to adventure, right? You want to talk about the villains at home?
Yeah. So villains at home. So the villain might be essentially the person who sends the hero on the journey. The example that Hal told to me was Lord Farquaad in Shrek, right? Farquaad is there in Duloc before Shrek goes on the grand adventure and sends Shrek. That's a good one because you are probably on the journey to come back. And then once you come back, then you're able to have like this final climactic moment at the place where you were at before.
Mm-hmm.
And you would still probably cut to this villain a few times throughout the show.
Yeah. And this is almost like a dark ally, where over the course of the journey, you probably realize that the person is evil. And when you start out, you probably don't know that they're evil.
Yeah. There's also beyond like those kinds of villains, I think the next kind would just be the ones who are like powerful entities in the special world.
Oh, you missed one. You missed one, which is the destroy your town. This is more of a henchman introduction, but like the call to adventure is that your family just got killed or whatever.
Yeah.
But probably you don't see the main villain there. You probably see their army or something.
Yeah, their army or some henchmen. And for other kinds of villains, they'll probably first appear once you go on the journey. Mm-hmm. I think it's fun to and this is something that different media do, that we did this in the superhero show that we did, but sometimes you'll get a villain that is referred to a lot by other characters, and you don't get to actually see the villain for a while. Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting way to do it.
Yeah, you can totally everyone's afraid of that person. Then it lets it be a character that is already established.
Mhm.
Or anything where you can get a reveal of this person's the same as that person.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Anytime you're playing two characters, you should always have a little meter in your mind of these might be the same character.
Totally. And okay, but we're talking about these villain scenes. Who the frick is the villain going to be able to interact with in these scenes?
Yeah, so if it's a total cutaway to a villain, the person the villain probably interacts with is whoever works for them, right?
Right. So hench people is
Uh-huh.
a concept that I think you can get a lot of mileage out of in pretty much every way. Um, great comedically, I think. Obviously, like a lot of villains in like animated movies are like really afraid, or a lot of henchmen in animated movies are really afraid of the villain,
And
and
bad at doing.
they're really like incompetent too.
And they bring the bad news to the villain, or like they don't tell them the bad news, and then
Yeah, yeah,
uh, that's a fun if you're going for the. Although you want to be careful about being comedic with your villains because
right.
it's hard to make them later seem scary or whatever if they're set up.
Yeah, yeah. The like comedy should kind of all be on the henchmen if you're doing anything like that. But
Uh,
there's kind of a reverse direction that you can do, which is interesting, where if you have like some sort of enemy that appears on a journey, like a threshold guardian who is able to really put up a fight with the hero, and they maybe escape, this like character who maybe was really powerful in a previous scene can then have a scene later with the villain and be very deferential to the villain as a way to kind of world build and show that this
mhm.
villain is like an even stronger power than this previous test.
Yeah. That happened in the Andromeda show at one point. I was like a minor, like a thief or something who was fighting and they beat me. And then Ashling, who was the main villain and who was also a dark ally, came out and she was like, "What did you just do?" And she like wrecked me. It was a fun prove your strength. And also, I mean, we're talking about a lot of this is just theory crafting. There's also the dark henchman or whatever. We keep on saying like all these things. But sometimes there is a sort of figurehead villain, like the evil emperor, but actually you have the whisper, the silver tongue character who is kind of really controlling the scene. And at some point they might kill the emperor. And then that's when the fan really takes the poo poo.
Yeah, that's when that thing happens. Um, and these are all ways, like kind of meta ways or like shape of show ways that the villain is going to fit into the show. But I think it's also pretty important that we talk about like what makes a good villain. It
Mm-hmm.
both on like how to improvise that way, but also when defining the character of the villain. Uh, Especially, what would you say you should do like in relation to the hero?
Ideally, you somehow complement them. Maybe
Mhm.
you're very similar to them, or you're the exact opposite of them. But some sort of ideological thing is kind of at stake as well.
Mhm.
And then hopefully there's some status play. We haven't really talked about status, but if you're doing improv, you should probably already know about it. We'll go deeper on it at some point, but ideally, the villain is someone who is very high status, but whose status is a little shaken by the hero, even if the
Mhm.
hero doesn't seem like the type of person who should be able to shake the villain's status.
Yeah.
Uh,
You
that
can
kind
do these status shakings in scenes with the henchmen. If they're like, you often see in media like them giving intermediate updates to the villain about the
uh-huh.
hero's progress, and it's like what they were able to beat the
And then they take it out on the hench,
yeah.
they kill two guards or whatever. Don't give me
Yeah,
any more bad news.
yeah. One thing that I think is really fun is if your hero's journey, I'll refer to it again, fucking quadrant theory. If your hero's journey involves your hero gaining like a new worldview or like overcoming their old worldview, then it can be a really fun thing to have your villain have the original worldview of your hero. And it provides for some great contrast in the ordeal later when the hero has to overcome this part of themselves.
Oh yeah, one thing we learned from slasher that's similar to that is that all the good slashers for the final scene, the slasher needs to want something from the last person they're killing.
Mm.
And I think the similar thing applies to the villain, where there needs to be some sort of emotional connection between the two people, where the villain doesn't necessarily want to just kill you right away. They want your attention, the hero's attention. They want to show them like, and almost the point where they would feel empty if the hero kind of died. Of like, they really need to kind of bask in it and want to really teach them a lesson and destroy it, or get
Yeah,
something out of them. Maybe they need them to help them open some box, or they need them to help them do something.
yeah,
Take
and
over the world.
you probably have some intuition about this, but to achieve that, a villain will often be like very prideful.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a big ego. Maybe they want to show the hero, like, look how powerful I actually can be. Um, it's this is extending a little bit past some of the hero's journey stuff that we talked about, but um, it's fun to play a villain like wholeheartedly when they have like a flaw like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is kind of the in. We're going to be talking about like kind of conflicting heroes versus villains and how you actually play that out. But I think one of the easiest ways for that tension to work out is if your villain does have some like truly bad qualities.
Uh-huh. And with the pride, if you, early on, actually, villains often try to be allies. They say, "Oh, come join my side." And then
Mm-hmm.
they get rejected because they've just made some new friend with like that one other squirrel that you're being mean to. And then it's like, that is really what stings, is the fact that they rejected your offer of companionship. Um,
Yeah.
Honestly, though, the cutaway villain, I do it all the time. I think it's great. I don't think that it's necessarily, well, I don't think it's necessarily the most rewarding of the options. I think
Mm-hmm.
either the mention it and leave it all the way to the end,
Mm-hmm.
or the kind of returny villains of like the thing that you leave, because we'll kind of talk about the ordeal at the end point physically of the journey. There should be some big old thing that you
Mm-hmm.
have got to deal with. And
Right.
then it's okay if that is kind of the end of your show, but a lot of times somewhere along the way back is kind of where you really have to have the rubber meet the road. So either way, maybe Mordor, you throw the ring in and then you're good. There are kind of two ways to do the thing.
Mhm.
But
Well, with that in mind, are there other things about villains that we and enemies that we should talk about, or should we kind of jump into this whole ordeal conversation?
uh, I think that just the people know that you have to expressively practice playing them in scenes and interacting. And you can do scenes where you're literally just killing hench people,
Mhm.
scenes where just where you're holding the focus and being evil. Because people who do improv are so, a lot of people are really willing to undermine the reality of the scene for a joke.
Mhm.
And that might be okay if you're a character who isn't a villain. But if you do that as the villain, you lose so much of your ability to help the show and to hold the audience's focus. So just practicing coming out high status and walking in a certain way and uh, being.
And and this is a whole ensemble exercise too, because we talked about this with being scary in improv, but you can't be like evil and intimidating in improv unless the characters around you are intimidated by you and are like affirming the things that you're throwing out there. So um, yeah,
Super.
just everybody is on deck to be intimidated by this villain. And honestly, sometimes it's much more the reaction that sells the intimidation or whatever effect you're trying to get from this villain than like
Mm.
the action itself.
Yeah, and this is another place where if your group has gender trouble, that might come out. You might need extra practice or like to have some sort of conversation, because some people have issues being deferential, especially when depending on who is the villain, they might have some trouble doing that and giving focus and acting scared.
Yeah. Um, oh, final thing we didn't really hit from here, which is just something you can do. maybe we talked about it last time actually, but one of the henchmen to the villain who uh, will go to the side of the hero.
Oh yeah. We talked about yeah.
Okay.
So and how you support that as a villain is be mean to your hench person. Really don't make them want to stay with you. And
Hmm.
all of those, I think practicing doing these scenes of like, okay, can you do a villain hench person scene? Can you do a villain as test scene? Can you? And we'll talk about the ordeal a lot as well as we get there.
Hmm.
But practice playing it and asking the people, okay, was that scary? No, run the scene a second time. Like, can you do it funny? Can you do it scary? Can you like just try playing with these knobs? Can you do it high status? Can you do it low status? Can you do but repeating scenes and seeing
Hmm.
if you can iterate in a anytime you want to move in a direction, you need to repeat. And then do it once and then do it a second time and see if you moved in that direction. If you didn't, try something else.
I just want to reaffirm, like I think that being able to play well with status is super important for villains, and I want to ask you, Hal, is like the focus on status, like is there any part of that that's unique to our training, or is that something that you get the impression that it is everywhere?
Um, okay, so I mean, we obviously have more of a Keith Johnstone y thing passed down to us because
Mhm.
of but my understanding is that status as a concept is used in most improv things. However, we should do an episode on it at some point because I think it's very mistaught. A lot of people teach status as like, if you make your body look more like a man's body, you are higher status. If you stand up straight and you lower your voice and like a bunch of things that really have nothing to do with stat. I mean, they have to do with our, gendered society. But and then if you make your body look more like a woman's body, then uh, that is totally not how you should do status as your group. And if you have a teacher teaching that way, well, it is what it is. But maybe at least clock in your head right now that there are other ways to do it. And really, it comes down to the attention thing that I talked about
Mhm.
before. If they want something from you, you have high status. If
Yeah,
if there's something that's keeping them there, so that one of the easiest ways to get it is by turning your back on the other people. And we'll do a status episode at some point because it's cool.
maybe a status duel.
Status
Bum bum
duel.
bum.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's jump into the ordeal then.
Sick. Safety warning.
Safety warning. Do
Uh,
not improvise without.
yeah. So this is one of the few things in improv that I screwed up pretty badly, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. As a director, during a new play, during one of the practices, I was on side coach for thing. I should have stopped a scene when we were working on the ordeal thing because yeah, things can push into emotional territory that is too far.
Right, but let's get out the base concept here, which I think one of the most basic things and also the most provocative and interesting things is that doing the ordeal involves some improviser on improviser conflict.
Yes. Yeah,
So
or at least doing it in the way that we're proposing. So you want to have safety structures in place to basically so that either person feels comfortable stopping the scene and maybe one other person besides the director being on side coach who can stop the scene, I think would be good
yeah.
and also debriefing probably every scene and sort of
Mhm.
going in cautiously, making
Yeah.
sure everyone is enthusiastic and not forcing anyone to do it.
And we will kind of safety ourselves here and flag. We talk a lot about like our school of improv, how we learned. This is very like an us thing. This is hearing about this. Don't assume that like the figures that we reference do this in the way that we do it.
Yes, and also it's not something that we're even that good at yet.
Yeah.
Um, this is very much like the newest thing that we have been playing with. It is really interesting, but it is risky, and we're still figuring it out. So if you want to figure it out, feel free.
But okay, improviser on improviser conflict. What does that really mean, right? So obviously we're not going to be actually like fighting in the ordeal.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what's going to be happening. Um, But yeah, to some degree, we're gonna try to be in a situation where both characters as improvisers, so in this case, it'll be the hero and the villain, uh, want things and are trying to make things happen that are contradictory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with everything in improv, what makes it compelling is that it's happening kind of on the spot. So with what makes it funny is that like this thing is genuinely making the other person laugh. What makes improv scary is that you genuinely feel a little scared when it's going on because you don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of times your emotional reactions come more easily than they would if the other person is playing in a realistic way. There is an incredibly powerful thing of the genuinely figuring something out. The audience loves to see you genuinely as an improviser. 2 minutes ago, I didn't know what was coming. Now I do.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the core of the ordeal of going into this thing, not knowing how you're going to get out of it as an improviser, and not giving yourself some escape path or, wink, wink, I'm winning the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. So you don't want to go into the ordeal, which as we mentioned is going to be this like climactic clash with the villain. You don't want to go into it and have your ally like tell you beforehand, oh, and remember that this is like the sword that kills them, and you can use it whenever you want. Or if your ally tells you that, then maybe you try to do that during the ordeal, and it totally doesn't work. You want to exhaust all your options. So sometimes you'll find yourself in an improv thing where there's like another place to go, and maybe you're holding on to it because you think like, oh, I don't want to break the tension yet, so I'll hold on to this and I'll use it after I feel like we've built up enough tension. But with the ordeal, like we're saying, we're actually trying to build the tension. We're trying to build it as improvisers. So as soon as you can, you're going to want to get out all of the things that you think would work.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to have something in your like deep back pocket.
Yeah,
but it shouldn't be in your mind while you're going through it, if that makes sense. But fundamentally, one way of saying another thing you could call the ordeal, because I still don't think we've explained what it is the death of the character. And a lot of times in movies, almost every movie has one of these things. And we're also using the word wrong, but we're a moment where the character literally either you think the character is dead or the character actually dies and somehow gets resurrected. And oftentimes it's a pretty long time where you think the character is dead, like 20 seconds or something like that.
Yeah. So it might be like a literal death like this. It could also be like a figurative death where I think people call it like the all is lost moment or whatever, but the hero, maybe the villain has in fact like enacted their plan to destroy the countryside. And like, you can see the ships going out and it seems like there is no way to win.
Yeah. You give up is another way of saying that. Yeah, just the really important thing is that to let them actually do it, which seems kind of counterintuitive if you're building a narrative and trying to make it all work out. You want to get there before they hit the doomsday button if you're kind of new to improv. But if you're really ready to take the next step and be like a movie or whatever, they actually hit the doomsday button. The poison goes into the water supply. You have failed your citizens and you have to grapple with that for a little while before you get to pull out all the stops.
Yeah.
This ordeal stuff can get pretty confusing. I'm jumping in the editing process to clarify that there are two different types of ordeals that we're talking about. One of them is the character ordeal. This is what's happening at the level of the character, where the character hits their lowest moment, and often it seems like the hero has died or given up hope that the villain has won. This is something that is not super common improv, but you might already be doing, and is definitely something that we would recommend you try. The second concept that we sort of were mentioning earlier on in the conversation is the idea of an improviser ordeal. You may have undergone one of these in one of your improv shows by accident. It seems as though the show has gone off the rails. You did not have anything in your back pocket. It seems utterly hopeless. The narrative is unsavable. you genuinely give up. Suddenly, you look at your partner, and through some sort of magic, you're reborn, and everything happens to click together. Even though you had never planned it, the things from earlier suddenly flip together, and you solve the situation and make it all work out. Most people do not intentionally enter into an improviser ordeal, but the concept and the new idea that Julian and I were talking about was to intentionally trigger an improviser ordeal at the same time as the character ordeal. So the improviser who is playing the hero would intentionally exhaust all of their options as an improviser for getting out of the situation narratively. Rather than trying to defeat the villain, what their main thing is to give up and to make their situation so bad that they cannot see a way out as an improviser, leaning into the emotions of giving up. The job of the villain improviser is to continuously apply pressure to the other player, to not allow them to have any easy way out, and to break them down into their lowest moment. Then, once they have fully given up and it seems as though the show is destroyed, that is the moment when things start to turn, and either the villain or the allies or the hero themselves suddenly give a little gift that allows for you to make your way out. But it is a gift that is made spontaneously and that could not have been seen before the hero and the improviser reach their lowest point.
Um, I think it could be helpful right now because we're still a little bit abstract. Like what kind of things are you going to be like figuring out in this scene? Like we could talk about some of the ordeals that we've done. You could talk about the Fracas one if you think that's illustrative here.
Yeah, one of the ones that I felt like, so one of the exercises that you can do is just to run an ordeal. Pick someone to be a villain, pick a hero, basically just give them a worldview. They arrive oftentimes at this sort of inner sanctum, whatever the deepest place of the villain's thing is. And then they're up against the villain. And oftentimes the hero gets either subdued or there's a moment where the villain is able to speak to them. Maybe the villain has all sorts of tentacles that like can each talk, or like they're just an echoing voice in the space. A really common one is that the hero is ready to defeat the villain, and the villain grabs their friend and holds them and is like, I'm going to kill your friend. And now they get to talk to you and explain to you why you are a failure and why you've let everyone down and why your particular world, you're too confident, you're too shy, you're too timid. Basically, almost acting like the inner voice inside your head that tells you all the things that are bad about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is the moment where the hero becomes the hero. This is, in my opinion, the most important part of the show, to the actual like the purpose behind it, I guess. Like, this is the moment where, just before like the ultimate up, you're feeling the ultimate down. You're feeling the least like a hero that you ever have if you're playing the hero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your job as the hero is to kind of genuinely give up. And then your job as the villain is to cross a line. And there's going to be a moment probably where you say something that's too far, where you like insult their mother or like insult whoever you're, and that suddenly will give the other person a burst of energy to come back and be like, you know what, you're wrong. And if you're a really good villain, you can kind of sense out, oh, what little seed can I drop that'll actually put them on the right course. So when you're looking at who's going to save the hero, the villain is actually one of the people who's kind of offering a little wink. But really, wherever you would normally stop, push it 20% farther. Literally, you can cut them in half, and you know that this person is the hero. There will be some justification for how they get out of this. Maybe don't cut them in half if your whole thing is taking place in a non-magical world with no remedy to that.
Sure. But truly, like, I would say even just do it. Like if you're listening to this and you are interested in trying out this kind of thing, because it puts you in this crazy space as an improviser where I feel like you have to fire on all cylinders because you're thinking, how the hell do I justify me coming back from this?
And hopefully don't think about it while they're like, put it off. Just be like, any idea you have, whatever idea you have for how to get out of it, make it impossible. Let's say you're like, oh, there's that elixir, like break it, just do it. Especially, this is really fun in detective shows like Sherlock Holmes. Like you see him fall off the cliff and then suddenly he walks out and then you have to explain how you survived.
Yeah. And like this might feel like it's kind of a dumb improv thing, but honestly, there's like such absurd justifications in movies at this moment. Like Pokemon the movie, spoilers, Ash Ketchum, he basically, he dies, he gets turned into like stone, right? And all of the Pokemon cry and their tears bring him back to life. That is the most kind of improv nonsense I've ever heard, but that happens in the movie. Famously in one of the old school Superman movies, he spins around the world backwards, turning like Lois Lane dies, and he flies around the world backwards, causing it to reverse time, and he stops the thing from happening. Like real works of fiction put their characters in the truly most down bad scenario ever.
Yeah, killing someone who's friends with the hero, that's a classic thing, because then they can still interact, but they're morally broken. And then they have to find some way to resurrect the person.
Mm-hmm.
And here is the kind of thing where it's worth separating the ordeal and so if you've read one of these like hero's journey style guides, they actually put the ordeal as the thing, like the big dragon kind of that you fight, where it's more of like a physical, they almost die. This is in the trash compactor. You think Luke is dead. But then there's a kind of second ordeal where you fight the real villain at the end, right. Where that's if you have a villain at home, you return home, and then the real ordeal is that Fiona's going to marry Farquaad. It's not that the dragon is that scary, So you might find yourself in a situation where this is actually broken up into two distinct things, where the character almost dies twice, or whatever.
Yeah. This was, I think, one of the kind of kink points in trying to iron this out, in translating it into an improv format, just for time considerations, right? Is exactly what Hal was saying, that the moment of highest like physical or like literal turmoil might not be the like emotional high point of the show, and the moment where the hero actually does like come to this realization.
And one of the biggest skills that you kind of build from a narrative perspective is being able to vibe out what type of show you're in. Like maybe this is the type of show where there's just one big ordeal then. Maybe this is clearly setting up for an even bigger one later. And the same with the what type of villain. Like we just listed a ton of different places that a villain should enter. Basically, if it makes sense for a villain to come in earlier, you put them in. And then if the villain hasn't arrived by the end, you now have arrived at the villain, or maybe there is no villain, but trying to follow one thing of like, oh, this is what happens in every show is lame. It's uncool.
Totally. A couple like different, this is kind of the basis of the ordeal. That was a lot, but this is the basis of the ordeal. There's a few kind of little touch points I'd like to hit. One, which we kind of talked about, or you kind of mentioned how the villain should get kind of like psychological at this point with the hero. And also that you should not be afraid to do some kind of like, like either crazy physicality or like kind of ethereal like conversation with the hero. Go ahead.
Yeah, ideally, we talked about the texture, but one of the best ways to be able to play good villains is to know how to use your body to make it look like crazy magic is happening.
Yeah. So that's good in just the stagecraft of trying to build this up to be an actual climactic clash. I think another question is what the allies' role in this ordeal is. So we've talked a little bit about how like an ally might die here, or allies might be present, but referring to the allies that you made along the journey. But yeah, let's talk about this. What do you think that the allies' role should be in the ordeal, Hal?
Yeah, it depends on the type of ally. So like
Right.
if you are a love interest, your role is often kind of to die or to like be in trouble, depending on what the character's worldview is. And one of the big things is if their worldview is like I do it all myself, then the ally is often their role is to be like, no, you got to work together and learn how to be a partner.
Mhm.
And if you're the mentor, your role is often to talk to them in the eye of the storm or whatever. And we'll kind of get into that later as well.
Mhm.
Um, but
How
do you
much
have
should the
another?
ally help with the hero kind of overcoming
I think
and yeah.
they often help a lot with getting the hero from their lowest point to the point where they're suited back up and ready to brawl again. They
Mhm.
don't usually help that much with the brawling unless you've assembled a team of like, I've been nice. If your main power is that you're nice and you've been nice to all these people along the way and then you summon them all, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. This is just kind of occurring to me in the moment, but you can also kind of achieve that. Like if you're a villain, I feel like movies do this, but you might set up some like other thing that's happening. So like, oh, like I'm sending in the henchmen to go take over the town now, and that's like a reason for the your allies to go deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I personally believe that like during the ordeal, as we discuss it, like in this improv context, there certainly should be some moments of the hero being alone with the villain. And I kind of believe that I like it at least the most when the most like the moment where the hero does overcome their flaw and become the hero is a moment where it is just them and the villain.
Yeah, a lot of times the ally's job is to be the safety net. So like ideally you don't come on, but
Mhm.
if the hero gets chopped in half, one of the
Yeah.
allies is coming on stage.
Right.
They're not gonna seal themselves,
Yeah. Yeah, and especially like in a meta way, if you sorry, you
go
go.
go go. No, no, you go.
If you are practicing this new way of doing improv in ordeal that is like difficult and even if you practice it a bunch, it might still be hard. Literally, yeah, you are on deck as an ally to come in and just massage it out, make sure that the your fellow improvisers are still having a good time and get
And
the show to the end.
it's totally right. Almost everyone we said the hero should not have a way out. The
Mhm.
villain maybe should not have a way out. Almost everyone else in the show should have
Yeah.
some sort of thing where they're like, all right, worst case scenario, I could do this, enter as a ray of divine light, enter as a brand new character, you know, and maybe I'm the villain's mother or I'm the villain's, identical twin who somehow knows how to just any number. I'm God itself. I don't care what it is. You have something in your back pocket.
Yeah.
That way you can safety net in if you really need be.
That's a great clock. You can think about the ordeal as some sort of cheerleading routine, where yeah, the villain and the hero are probably throwing each other up in the air, but you are on deck to spot. You are standing there on in the wings, like with your arms out, ready to catch them if
Mm-hmm.
things go awry.
And with that, like subtle is always better if you can get it across. If you clock if anyone who's not on stage does a burst of narration, they are usually giving you a huge hint. If you're the hero and you're really down bad, and then someone comes out and they're like, the smell of cookies wafts through the air, you better know that that is some giant clue to like of how you're going to get out of this. And don't just be like, oh, why does it smell like cookies right now? Like,
Yeah,
they're helping you.
yeah, you know. I think it would be helpful to talk a little bit just about some of the ordeals that we did.
Yeah, sure. I want to talk about one of the ordeals that was memorable from practice we ran at Fracas Improv Festival. This was not during our show. This was during our practice. I think John Cameron and I were in the scene. I don't remember who was who. I think I was probably the villain. But the scene we ran took place in a kind of world of imagination where the the hero's imagination was what was building the world, and the villain was trying to turn the whole world into like gray, depressing. Uh, things, and they were making them feel really guilty about something that had happened in the past and easing them into giving up and going to sleep. And this person eventually went to sleep and woke like and it just, we have given up. They're like, I'm hopeless, and they went to sleep. And it seems like now the villain is just going to have free reign in the imagination world. The scene ends, so someone swipes, and then a new scene starts that's that person's dream in their sleep that takes them back to a memory where they're driving in a car with their friend. And through that memory, the friend, like they talk to this sort of imaginary version of their friend and realize that they're not responsible for the thing that happened. And then they come back to the dream world, like all ready to be like, no, I am this awesome person. I can do these things. And the villain looked shaken, and all of a sudden the whole world started doing crazy stuff. And it was like, okay. So it had this kind of eye of the storm moment that we talked about, where a lot of times the person gets chopped in half and then they get washed down the river and they wake up in the mentor's hut and they're being stitched back together. And they're like, I lost everything. And the mentor's like, no, you're special. You're awesome. Don't be too hard on yourself. And then they go back in.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I can just picture, maybe I'm thinking about something specific, but in this moment, like the hero might be like thrown underwater and they're like floating. And yeah, it's this moment of like, it's very intense, but it's very calm and quiet under the water. And they're able to,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like think through and have some, how do I put it? Some, otherworldly clarity.
Memories are really great for this, and you can initiate a memory by having someone step forward, and you can practice this. You can be like, let's try doing a scene where we have a memory flashback. Someone step forward and say, suddenly they remember, and then you do a
Yeah.
little tiny mini scene with one of the other people. That's a calmer moment.
That was one of the ordeals in our actual run of shows. It was the show we mentioned it last time actually with Servbot that Danya was playing. Um, One of our fellow improvisers, Simran, who was on the podcast before, uh, was the hero basically. And we had a memory that was in this eye of the storm moment, in the middle of the ordeal.
And the memory was queued up in Servbot's like computer frame, so they were actually watching a video of the memory of Servbot like playing
Yeah.
with the kids or the dad. I think Servbot had gotten them into like a car crash or something, so the
Yeah,
dad had
the
hated.
dad, had died, and I think Simran had like blamed herself or
Oh,
something.
she had blamed Servbot for the
Or
dad's death, and that's why she was
yeah,
always mistreating Servbot through the
yeah,
whole.
yeah, yeah.
And then she got to see. Okay,
Right.
yeah, it was awesome. That was a
Yeah,
good moment. We can link that in the.
yeah. We'll link it. But yeah, so I totally buy this eye of the storm moment. It's so present in media, and uh, something I remember, like Dan Klein would say, my improv professor from back in the day when we were talking about status, actually, was once you like hear this concept, you're going to be seeing it everywhere. And I feel the same about this ordeal stuff. Like think about the things that we're talking about now, and the next movie that you watch, the next TV show that you watch, this stuff comes out. It is very real.
Mm-hmm. And then go see an improv show, and you'll realize that it doesn't happen. Uh, like
Yeah.
this is it's occasionally, but really, this is what's kind of missing from a lot of improv shows that are pretending to be narrative show, but they're missing this kind of key part that's in almost every movie.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an improv stereotype that there's a real like kind of easy ending, and it might be like some difficulty on, okay, how are we going to justify that this all wraps up? But it's not tense. It might be a little bit difficult, like as an actual task, but there's no real tension. I feel often
Mm-hmm.
in that scenario. But the purpose of this, and I think why we're really into this, is because it does create tension on stage in a
Mm-hmm.
palpable way.
Yeah, people will be like staring and like, this is crazy. And this is part of where like go learn stage combat, and we'll do an episode on stage combat in between this and the Shakespeare. But if
Mhm.
it's a similar thing where how do you create genuine tension on stage?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's see. Other than that, another kind of touch point to have is how long should it be?
It depends on what's going on, but like if you're having the full ordeal, eye of the storm, resurrection, like that might be 10, 15 minutes of your show. That might be a lot.
Yeah, might and probably will be the longest scene
Yeah, if it's
in
all
the
one
show.
scene, it's your longest. It's the heart of the show. It's going to be the most interesting part of the show.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a perfect time. You know, we've been talking about this mostly in isolation, but this is a perfect time for to have the conflict that you're having with the villain be interesting, to use all the things that you learned on your journey. So even though we're saying that like you should like the hero should be down bad at some point, the hero should face some adversity. And this is also a great time though to remind the audience and remind each other of all the like cool things that you learned on the journey. So obviously if there's any like literal skills that you gained on the journey, you can use this. And I think it's a great time to like touch on some of the past things that you learned.
Mm-hmm. Ideally, your hero might have been set up with some sort of thing they're afraid of doing, or like some line that they have failed to cross in the past, and
Mm-hmm.
now they have to cross it in order to do the ordeal. That's great. Uh, and to practice this, I would recommend run a full show and then go back and be like, okay, let's go back to that moment of the show. How could we have played it? And play it a couple different times with the director, who's telling you like, wait longer, try that again, but push even further. Try that again, but push less far. Whatever needs to change.
Yeah. Um, let's talk about and just make sure that we've hit all the exercises that we want to hit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so do you want to talk about the coin one or no?
Sure. This is an exercise that's kind of like a stage combat exercise that I got from Matt Chapman, who's a teacher at Stanford. He's wonderful, but he is very focused on making games look real on stage. And how it works is that you have two people, and each of you hold your palm out flat, and you put a quarter in one of your palms. And then you're fighting to try to make the other person drop their coin. You're not allowed. Cupping is BS, is what he says. If you kind of cup your hand, that's just unsportsmanly. It doesn't look. It makes it look bad for the audience. So you're trying to also keep the audience engaged. The same with like doing strategies where you just hide in the corner. You're trying to like actually play the other person, but your goal is to knock the coin out of their hand by whatever measure. And the first thing you do is you just play this game, and it's pretty fun to watch. And then you're like, can we have a predictable outcome? So can we make this still fun to watch if they know? You whisper to the person who's going to win. Can you make it fun to watch? Or can you make it so the audience doesn't know who's going to win? And one of the best ways to do that is to have it be best of three. And if it's best of three, it doesn't matter who wins the first one. So you can play the first one for real. And that's a good thing to think about in any combat situation of like the first bout, whoever just sort of does the more powerful improv thing, give it to them. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You can just actually kind of clash it out. You probably listened to our cold open, a little bit more goofy of a version, but yeah, truly like who comes up with the more striking improv thing.
Uh-huh. And Julian, how do you do that? Like, do you ever just give it your all of like, I'm just going to power up weapons wise as much as possible, or
Like in that game or like in improv?
in improv? Like how do you do the thing where let's say I've been coming at you at a 6. I've been like putting a lot of things that would be genuinely pretty hard to beat. How would you take it up to an 8 if you're fighting me?
I mean, it feels like a lot of it is like it starts physically. Like if you, at least for how it works for me, I feel like if I'm trying to like pump it up, I have to like accept it in my body that like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is getting real. I probably tense up more. I just embody that a little bit more. And then in terms of like in terms of actually like bringing it to an 8, um, I don't know. I mean, it's truly just like one of the main things we do in improv, right, is practice with an empty tank. and practice just coming up with anything blank. And usually I'll have exhausted things, and it's just about, I guess, digging deep and trying to say anything that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It honestly is not that different a feeling than like when we're playing, like if we played like 17 things or whatever, and I had to say like the 14th thing.
Yeah. For context, 17 things would be like 17 things that are purple, and Julian has to list them all in a row. Two things that I think are useful. You talked about moving as a chess piece, how you'd get your body lower so that you could levitate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a similar thing, like there's the Princess Bride thing where you start the duel left-handed.
Yeah.
Put some abstract limitation on yourself. Don't fully commit to the opening of the duel, and
Yeah.
then you have room to rise. But yeah, all the status exercises that we've talked about, status duels, but playing a scene where both people try to take the high status or the low status. But with all of the tug of war thing, and tug of war, do the tug of war with an invisible rope and see, you can kind of ramp up how much you're trying to win, but you always have to keep the rope the same length.
Right.
And even in our opening thing where we were just doing the imagination duel, if I said something, like Julian wouldn't be like, no, that doesn't happen.
Right.
That happens somehow. That helps me.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to do this stuff might bring you back to like old playground days. Playing and be like, no, actually I have like a tank, and oh, no, like that's wrong. We definitely want to maintain the improv of it all, that we're accepting the reality. And like a kind of radical acceptance of the reality in a way where you're putting your all into this, but without denying anything that your fellow improviser is putting out there.
And one thing that you'll learn if you do a lot of status duels is that one of the best ways to get the high status is to intentionally take the low status. You take deep in the low, they kind of lower, and then you can come up and punch them or whatever. And a similar thing, if you are the hero, or if you want to become the hero in your duel, take damage, go through an ordeal, and then when you come back out, you're going to be unbeatable. So know that your job is kind of to lose at the beginning of the hero.
Yeah. We should probably wrap soonish, but one question to you is that we practice the ordeal within the hero's journey, but how do you think it applies to other improv formats or like any parts of the ordeal? Because I think both of us are really into the idea. Yeah.
I feel like you've been asking me a lot of questions. I don't know if just throw that question back at you.
Oh, great. Yeah. How do I think it can? I think that in general, this is kind of what we've been saying, but we can accept like higher stakes in like all the climaxes of our shows. Like most shows that we do, that any sort of narrative show that you do, there will probably be some pretty climactic final moments. And if you can, you don't always have to go 100%, right? You can practice doing a little bit of back and forth tension. But I just think that it makes endings better. I'm a little bit hard pressed to think about how we could use like ordeal skills outside of like basically the ordeal of the show, like a climactic moment. But I do feel like it can apply to pretty much any show that does have a climactic moment, which will be any narrative show.
Yeah, any musicals have for sure have an ordeal if they're like, or at least it will make your musical better to add one. Shakespeare, even the Shakespearean comedies have a moment where it seems like it's not going to work out, or at least to the character. Usually the audience kind of already knows that it's going to work out. Film noir should totally have or any detective thing should have a moment where it seems like all is lost and then the detective suddenly pieces it together. Rom-coms always have a moment where it seems like they're not going to be together and then you chase them through the airport. Any other type of narrative that I'm missing? Slashers have them.
Yeah.
we'll talk about the last scene of a slasher. But
yeah, I mean, all that to say, this is to date, for me at least, like one of the most interesting tools for like climax in improv.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just choosing to treat it like it's going to be kind of serious. And
Yeah, yeah, and treat it like that. But I feel personally, around the same time that we started practicing the ordeal is when I got a lot more like joy in my improv and just like the discovery of it. Because if you do the ordeal and if you have to, as a hero, go through the ordeal, you're gonna have to like just come up with something, and you're gonna have to be delighted by your own by whatever you say. And that put me on a little bit of a kick where I was really into just going with whatever people said. And I was a lot less like caught up in the mechanics of any reality.
now that you say that, what caught me is the first ordeal that I think happened was in one of our shows was For She Doth Hath No Elbows, which was a Shakespeare show that was a total comedy. It was troll, no violence whatsoever. But we were led up to we dug ourselves into a genuine improviser hole. There was no way out. That we had half the grain, that we were pretending to have twice as much. We had dressed this old man up like this woman who was going to get killed instead of her. And it was all about to come crumbling down. And one of the characters put on this blindfold because they were just told to. And when they took the blindfold off, they were going to see that everything was fake. And there was no way out. It was like 30 minutes into the show. And then they took the blindfold off. And the moment that the blindfold came off his eyes, I suddenly registered how we were going to get out of it. And it was like, oh. But for every one of those shows, you have a show where there's no way out.
Yeah, so there's some discovery and some joy that can come in practicing this. I know we're talking about it like it's serious, and you should treat it like it's serious, especially with your ensemble. But I think it can become very delightful.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be villainous or violent. It could be the mystery, the detective genuinely solving the mystery in front of people is crazy. It's really trustful, leaping.
Cool. Well, we're very open to hearing any questions that you might have about the ordeal. Please shoot it.
Yeah, email it in to muprovmusings@gmail.com. You could be the first ever question of the week.
Yes. With that, though, we'll probably close out this episode, and we're going to continue with some more Hero's Journey content.
But yeah, next week we're going to be talking about narrative. We're really going to be getting into the sort of last putting it all together of the narrative before we get into our show. I guess this has been
Muprov
Musings.
So my sign off is it's a little bit of a book corner that I wanted to do, because I've realized that I've accumulated some kind of funny and interesting books over the past couple of weeks. And I think the way I want to do this is I want to put the book to the camera, and then you can read out the name of the book.
Okay. Oh, Improv Nation by Sam Wasson. Wasson?
Yeah, this was your recommendation.
Oh, yeah. Julian was asking me about some improv books, and he said History of Improv. And I said either Whose Improv Is It Anyway, which is a more recent and aware of racial and gender history, or Improv Nation, which is goes further back and is a little broier. Teach Yourself Accents, North America, a handbook for young actors speaking, with a DVD.
I got this when I picked up Improv Nation from the library, and it's really there's some accents in there you should not be learning. So what is this I got for free?
Guinness Book of World Records 2016.
Yep, I got that for free from the library too, and like to keep. And finally,
Prayers for Children.
So these are my 4 books: Improv Nation, Teach Yourself Accents, Guinness World Records 2016, and Prayers for Children.
Can you read a prayer to sign us off?
I'll read a prayer to sign us off. This prayer is called The Gift. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what can I give him? Give him my heart.
Ah, yes. You got anything else about that book or no?
No, I just thought it'd be funny.
Yeah.
See me now, like you did back then. See me now, I should thought you cared. All these times they're changing. Oh, and my mind is rearranging. Can't you see me now? Like you always did. Can't you see me now? I just wanna be with you. When the times they seem so crazy, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? See me now. Can't you see me now? I remember way back when, oh, and times they are changing, you know, things are rearranging. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now?